I first covered military conflict Vietnam a couple years back when it launched, and it showed a lot of promise. It was a little rough around the edges in some areas, but overall I was really happy with the way it launched, and I was looking forward to where it was going to go from there. Had a lot of potential, player base was pretty strong, and I was pleased with the content it started out with, especially with the promise that there was more to come. But as time went on, the player base fell off harder and harder, and I ended up losing interest as well, and eventually I came back a year after I quit. You'll find that there's been a lot added, a lot of it addressing issues that not only I had, but other players had. Military conflict Vietnam is in an interesting place right now, where it has succeeded in addressing the issues people had. It's really improved in some areas. The gameplay has gotten more depth, the classes are more distinct, customization's better, and the content that's coming is even more promising, aside from the stuff that's already been added, which is really good. It's just that there isn't really an audience around to appreciate it anymore, which sucks, but I think there's still a market for that, and I think that there's a solution to this, which I'll get to later on in the video. So to start out, quick rundown. Military conflict Vietnam is an arcadey Vietnam shooter that focuses on the US Army going up against the Viet Cong with a huge weapon arsenal, different classes that fill different roles, game modes that vary from like battlefield-style conquest to team deathmatch to gun game, and so on. There's also modes like Firefight, which is a Counter-Strike-like mode where you have limited respawns depending on whether you capture flags or not. Overall, it's fun. The shooting is rewarding and satisfying, everything's punchy, the guns feel good to use. I like the addition of different firing modes and options for different guns. And the two factions stand out pretty well. I haven't really had moments where I would hesitate not knowing whether I'm firing on a friend or a foe. I've noticed that problem with some modern war games and games from that time, especially with some Battlefield 2 mods where it's so frustrating that you'll see someone and you won't know if they're friendly or hostile because their uniform is a slightly different tint than yours. But military conflict Vietnam makes it very clear who's who, and the customization helps with that as well. The customization options are really distinct. They're separated from the weapon menu, so you can take care of that before the game starts instead of worrying about it while you're playing, which was an issue at launch, but again, they've rectified that. I'd say the biggest reason why the player base fell off, aside from the fact that you can only hold people's interest for so long, is that the initial year of support wasn't good. It's not the nicest thing to say, but it's kind of the truth. The devs did all the wrong things. The game launched with 6 maps. An embassy, one of the maps, just wasn't all that fun to play, so you basically had 5 maps at launch. Players were pretty eager for new levels and some new guns to shake things up. And we got one new level, the Hospital 1, and pretty much nothing else. There were some new weapons initially added, like the T223 and the VZ58, which were fun, but then we just got a deluge of gun variants that were a little more than reskins, like a lot of the SOG guns, a lot of the silenced guns. And though that sort of variety is nice, but it's better to have guns that have more distinct differences, stuff that you can immediately tell, like this shoots slower, this is more accurate, this has a larger magazine size, this operates differently. And it was kind of a mess, not helped by the fact they had some awful community managers, so bad that I got driven out of the community after pointing out some issues with the game, but it's in the past. It seems like every game with the community just gets the worst community managers possible. Helldivers had the issue, I've seen it with other games as well. I don't know why the worst people get this role, but they do. I'm hopeful that this time around they've improved things on that end. I mean, I'm not joining the Discord again, but I can still enjoy the game as an observer. With that out of the way, the issues brought up, and an explanation as to why I think the player count dropped so hard over time. Aside from the obvious issue of competition with other multiplayer games, it's a crowded market. There's only so much you can do. Let's talk about how it's really redeemed itself from 2023 to 2024. The classes, for one, are much more distinct. This is something that's been needed for a while. There was a lot of overlap with classes like Medic and Assault, where Medic would get some assault rifles. There were other issues as well with like Sniper kind of overlapping, with Engineer and Radioman feeling samey. Overall, they didn't really have good identities. That they had some potential, but there was too much overlap. And thankfully, recent patches have rectified this. So, Assault is more versatile. They have more aggressive options for combat, more diverse options. They're all about fighting. So you have weapons with underbarrel grenade launchers, you have shotguns that can mount bayonets, you have high-capacity SMGs like the Thompson and the PPSH, in addition to battle rifles, assault rifles, and everything else. They're all about damage dealing, and they get access to equipment like the Molotov and rifle grenades and everything else. And this is important because originally there was just, again, too much overlap, but the addition of new equipment has done a lot of good for making the classes stand out. Medic wields lighter weapons, SMGs, and a few carbines, so they can't really go toe-to-toe with Assault in straight combat unless they're ambushing. They work better as a support class now. Gunner has more options. Gunner worked fine, it was just that they only had like a handful of guns, and the MGs some of them were just kind of reskins of each other, but now they stand out. So like the TUL-1 and the RPK are more than just reskins. One has the drum magazines, the other has the larger standard magazines. In addition to some new options like the MG34, the Bren, the M60 with belts, and the RPD SOG, which is a really neat gun because on one hand, it's very effective for spam firing and for just flooding an area with bullets. It also lacks a bipod and it isn't very accurate, so there's serious trade-offs for using it. Snipers now have access to some more options for semi-auto snipers, including the M656 sniper, which is a scoped M16, and the MAS 49 rifle for the Viet Cong class. The Engineer and Radioman also get some unique tools added to their list. I liked the additional primaries, but the secondaries are what really got my attention. Like the M79 SOG, which is like this smaller sawed-down version of the grenade launcher, or how there's another variant of the RPG that isn't quite as accurate, but it is good for throwing explosives down if you just need some quick firepower being deployed. And that leaves Radioman, which is sort of the same. And this is, of course, on top of all the other secondary options. A bunch of new pistols and other things have been added, including the Well Rod for the US Army, and the Mauser C96 and Shengzi Type 17 for the Viet Cong. Not every gun is viable, but I don't care. I think a lesson TF2 taught me is that you can have bad weapons in a game as long as they're fun. Not every gun has to be competitive with the other, as long as it has a redeeming quality with it. So yeah, like the Shangzi Type 17, it's a 10-shot carbine. It's not the best, but it's a goofy weapon, it's fun. Same goes for some of the other options, like the Type 64 just blasts out its entire magazine in like half a second. It's ridiculous, it's inaccurate, but it's a fun weapon. There are mainstays you can go to if you want to be viable in combat. Some guns are more effective than others, and although the meta has changed, it's no longer about bolt-action rifles. That was the big go-to at launch. Everybody just went for the Springfield or the Mosin or the Kar 98, and people kind of avoided every other gun because of just the sheer spike damage that they could deal, one-tapping those classes. Another important addition are accessories, which will add weight to your character and can give you more options for staying in the fight, which, again, give the classes more identity. Assault has access to good stuff like body armor and things like that. And again, the weight for them can add up, but they can make the difference between staying in a firefight and getting overwhelmed quickly. I really liked the additions of them, along with some new melee options and some new throwables. It's impressive what all the team has come up with. And I'm really glad that they've focused more on impactful weapon additions instead of just reskins. Sure, we did get some more reskin weapons as well. I don't mind them as long as they come alongside actual gameplay changing stuff. Additionally, we have plenty of new maps. That's one thing I love, is that the map roster has been filled out. They have added a lot. And these are fun. They even fixed up Embassy. I didn't expect that. I like the aesthetics of Embassy, but I didn't like the gameplay of it. But they've added stairwells and other things, open larger areas for climbing up and down the map, so it's less of a hassle and it's less one-sided. It's fun to play now. And the new maps are a breath of fresh air. They go all over the place in terms of location, and that's why they stand out. So you have some urban maps like Way City, you have some maps in the rice fields and slums, you have this one that's on the card, US ship, where the Viet Cong and the US Army are fighting their way through the upper and lower floors of this ship. It's a really cool map. The Radioman isn't as useful in it, sure, but it has a unique atmosphere. It reminds me of the submarine level from the game 13. In fact, you can even throw your knife and dual wield now, like in 13. Makes me feel like they're preparing to remake the game properly this time. But enough about that. One thing that I do like is that the levels really fill different niches. So each one kind of has its own like long range, close range, medium range vibe. They have different like tight corridors or lanes and things that stand out. So when you're hopping on a map, you're not feeling like you're playing the same thing, just slightly retuned. I'd argue that the new maps are actually better than the launch ones. I'm not sure how much the launch ones have changed aside from Embassy, but these new ones are really nice. I really enjoyed the Slums one the most, but the others are really good too. The new modes are interesting as well, like Gun Game allows you to get access to some of the guns that aren't available by default, like akimbo weapons, which are very fun even if they aren't the most accurate. And stuff like the M202 Flash, which is very overpowered but intentionally so. That's a fun weapon too. There are also some hints of what's going to come, like with the Auto 5 that was added to Gun Game into the firing range. They're still working on that Rhodesia DLC, which is really, that's going to be interesting. I played the Battlefield Vietnam Rhodesia mod, and I got the feeling that that's going to be a pretty crazy setting. I'm curious as to how they're going to handle it, but judging by how they've handled the second year of support for military conflict Vietnam, I'm feeling hopeful about it. Same goes for the Zombie DLC, where you can find traces of it within the announcements and within the game files. And it seems like it'll be fun too. I would say that some areas that might need work, the sights for akimbo weapons aren't good. You are awkwardly holding one sight up to your head and aiming the other gun lower. It's really weird, and I would rather just have it like Killing Floor. That had a fine system for aiming, where you were holding the guns closer to your head, but it wasn't quite a perfect match. So it still were inaccurate, but it was at least easier to see what you were shooting at. Whereas with military conflict of Vietnam, you can barely see what you're shooting at when you're aiming down sights with dual-wielded guns. They're still fun to use, but you're pretty much better off just hip-firing them instead. I would also say that the firefight mode can really drag. I like the potential for it, but the system for it is a bit wonky. It's that like even if you control all points, if you are low on reinforcements, you're kind of screwed, because all it will take for enemies to retake one of your points to get their reinforcements back while you're left alone. And this happened more than a few times when testing it out. It wasn't just a single instance. Achievements are a fun addition. I don't really have any issues with them. I'm hoping that progression will lead to something, whether it's more customization options or weapon skins or something. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be as simple as a texture edit for how some weapons could look, or even just other minor cosmetic stuff. I like the way the game tracks progress and has medals for different things you do. Reminds me of Bad Company, which was a very fun Battlefield game. So, getting back to the question raised at the beginning, the player base isn't that big. I'm not sure how you can grow it in such a stacked market, especially when the game is paid for. Going free to play is a bad idea because that would require in-game economy, and this does not need it, nor would it be a welcome addition to me. I'd say solution's a bit strange, but take the Ravenfield approach. Go all in on the bot support aspects. Advertise that. Focus on that. This is now like a break room shooter where you have 15 minutes to kill, then hop on Military Conflict Vietnam, change the bot sliders, and get going. Having options, there are already options for adjusting the difficulty, adjusting the total number of bots. A lot of the groundwork's already there. I mean, the only thing I would suggest is just go a little further, give you options for personalizing the names of bots or deciding whether each one has its own difficulty, so on and so forth, and making the zombie DLC available to play solo, that too. I think there's room for it to work, because we're sort of sorely needing games with multiplayer support that have bots. Games without that just die, and you can never play them again. Look at poor Spec Ops The Line. That desperately needed bot support, but it didn't get it. Military Conflict Vietnam is definitely on the right track. It just needs some tweaks here and there to really hit its stride. Overall, I would say I'm glad I returned to Military Conflict Vietnam. I didn't leave on the best terms, and I was really bitter about the game when I ended up leaving, because I felt like the devs were just kind of ignoring all criticism. But I think that was just more of the community managers kind of screwing things up for them, and the fact that they didn't have the right artists on hand to make the content that was needed. Hence why we got stuff like 4K textures and enhanced models for existing guns instead of new weapons. But those issues have been rectified, and I'm really happy with the way the final game is shaping up to look. I'm not sure what all is left on the roadmap aside from the zombie mode and the Rhodesia DLC. I think they've mentioned a campaign, but I'm not sure how that's going to work. Could be cool though. I mean, they've got plenty of AI stuff already in place. I guess it's just a matter of how the campaign would play out. Whether it's like Rising Storm 2s, where you play through different maps throughout the scope of the war, and technology shifts, available weapons shift, or if it's going to be like a story-based approach, whether you're completing objectives in an area or something like that. Sort of like Ravenfield Spec Ops mode. Keep coming back to Ravenfield, that's such a fun game. But so is Military Conflict Vietnam, and in the state it's in right now, I'd still strongly recommend it. It's a good game, and I appreciate the fact that despite the obstacles, the devs are continuing to work on it, refine it, and improve it. I'm wishing them luck with the roadmap additions to come. Thanks for watching. Take care.